Hey guys, Telegram Sam here. If you don't already know, I have an Instagram. It's telegram_Sam_vinyl. So if you're on Instagram, check me out on there. But today we're going to be talking about a popular topic in the VC, which is debut albums. I've seen people do genre specific, like the greatest debut albums in rock, jazz, country, soul. I've seen people do decade specific, like the best debut albums of the 70s, 80s. And I've seen people do year specific, like the best albums of like 1972 or whatever. But I just picked 10 favorites that I just currently have in my collection. I'm not saying these are the greatest debut albums of all time, besides the last one I'm going to show, which I do think is the greatest debut album, at least in rock music. But these are just my personal favorite debuts that are in my collection that I have currently, so don't chew me alive for some of the stuff I show. But yeah, let's get started. First up, I'm going to be showing New York Doll's self-titled album. This originally came out in 1973. I mean, this is just proto-punk, glam rock, hard rock. I mean, just so important to the later CBGB punk scene that kind of happened in the mid to late 70s, where you had the birth of the Ramones, Television, Talking Heads. This band was such a big influence on all of those bands. And this was produced by Todd Rundgren, which would probably be the last person I would ever think to produce an album like this. But it's just so fantastic. Literally all of their great songs are on this album. Personality Crisis, Looking for a Kiss, Vietnamese Baby, Lonely Planet Boy, Trash, Pills, Jet Boy. I mean, this is not only their greatest album, but just such a solid debut album from one of the godfathers of punk rock music. So, and we're taking a little bit of a left turn from punk to country folk. This is John Prine's self-titled debut album. This originally came out in 1971. Like I said, it's a great country folk song. And I feel like this is so different from a lot of the country that was coming out during this time. Because you have songs on here like Illegal Smile, Spanish Pipe Dream, Sam Stone, which is kind of a song about Vietnam veteran coming back and being addicted to heroin, because that was something that was happening during that time. All these soldiers were coming back who were obviously mentally scarred by what they had seen in battle, and there was a lot of heroin over in Vietnam, so they became heroin addicts. The greatest lyric ever in that song is "There's a hole in Daddy's arm where all the money goes." And it's like there was no country songs talking about, Vietnam veterans being addicted to heroin during this time. It was just so non-commercial. And man, John Prine, he released so many great albums, and we sadly lost him last year. But this is probably the greatest country album, in my opinion, that came out during the 70s. I mean, like Flashback Blues, Your Flag Decal Won't get you into heaven anymore. Angel from Montgomery, that's such a beautiful song. And Paradise, which is about like strip mining and coal mining and the damage that does to the miners and the environment. It's like, who was doing that in 1971? Only John Prine was really doing that. So, I mean, just such a legend. Next up, we got a personal favorite album of mine. This is Bleach by Nirvana. This originally came out in 1989. I'm one of those people that hates using the term grunge, because if you're talking about like the three main grunge bands during the whole Seattle period, which was Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden, they all were kind of put under that same moniker of grunge, but they all sounded so different. And to me, Nirvana was the heaviest of them all. They were very influenced by the Melvins, Black Flag, Sonic Youth, very punk rock, alt rock, hard rock, and this is definitely an example of that. This is my personal favorite album from Nirvana. You have Floyd the Barber, About a Girl, Love Buzz, that their great cover of that Shocking Blue song, Negative Creep, Mr. Mustache, Big Cheese, Gowner. I mean, I love this album. This was such an influential album for me in my teenage years, and this actually introduced me to like punk rock music. But yeah, such a great album. I know I sound like such a hipster being like, oh, like Bleach is their best album, Nevermind sucks, but it's true. I just really prefer this album over Nevermind. I like In Utero, but this will just always be my favorite out of all of their albums. Next up, we got Talking Heads 77 by the Talking Heads. You guessed it, came out in 1977. Amazing sort of art, experimental, punk, new wave. I mean, Talking Heads are just such a unique band. There will never be anyone that sounds like them. And all of their albums sound so different from one another because they kept on building and getting into like world music kind of more in the 80s. But this, you can definitely hear the influence that a lot of, like I said, like the New York Dolls, early punk, like the Stooges, but also sort of Roxy music and like glam rock. But they also had their own like sort of art school spin to it because they all went to art school and that's how they met. Just very innovative, and a lot of people say Talking Heads were like the first like alt indie band. But yeah, I mean, Talking Heads are just so influential, and this is just such a great album. I mean, you have Psycho Killer on here, like they're one of their greatest songs. So next up, we got a heavy classic in hardcore punk. But this is Bad Brains' self-titled debut. This originally came out in 1982. A great mix of hard punk and reggae. They were one of the first like big African American hardcore bands in the Washington D.C. scene. They were actually too intense for Washington D.C. They actually got banned from like all the major clubs there, and they ended up moving to New York, where the songs on here, Pay to Come, I Love Ja, and Ja Calling Dub were recorded live, and they liked the way the recording sounded so much they decided to do this album. And then later on they ended up going back to Washington DC once the hardcore punk scene began to grow more and become like more inclusive. But yeah, it's such an important album to have if you're into more hardcore punk music, and just such an important part of that history. So, and of course it wouldn't be a Telegram Sam video if I didn't show this album. This is the Stooges' self-titled album. This came out in 1969. I would describe this as, garage. They were kind of doing a psych thing early on, post-punk. I mean, you have I Want to Be Your Dog on here, which is such an important song in the whole punk rock history. It's considered like one of the first punk rock songs. But this was produced by John Cale from the Velvet Underground. They were signed to Elektra during this time, and Elektra was really trying to have like, we're signing a lot of these like kind of Doors copycat bands because the Doors were so successful for them. So they're signing a lot of sort of copycat bands like them, and that's why they signed the Stooges. Like even the cover kind of looks like the first Doors album. But man, this is just such an important album. Not my favorite Stooges album, but you can definitely, it's interesting to hear this album and then the last great album they did, which was Raw Power, which is like, I mean, it's my all-time favorite album. You guys know how much I love that album. But this one still is great, still interesting to listen to, and such an important album in the history of punk rock. So, and then next up, we got Rap, one of the greatest rap albums of all time. This is Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers by WuTang Clan. I mean, not only one of the best records of rap albums of all time, but this album is credited with bringing back the spotlight onto the East Coast, because the East Coast is where rap and hip hop were created with Sugar Hill Gang, Fab Five Freddy, Grandmaster Flash. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, it kind of went over to the West Coast where you had Dr. Dre like doing crazy stuff with NWA, his own solo stuff, Nate Dogg, Corrupt. and the spotlight was mainly on the West Coast. And then this album came out, and it was all about the East Coast again, because Wu-Tang Clan kind of took the hardcore beats that Dr. Dre was using over in the West Coast, but kind of taking out some of the gangster lyrics that NWA, Nate Dogg, and like Snoop Dogg were using. Talking about the strife of living in Southern LA and all the gang wars and murders and drug dealings that they were living with, and obviously like the police brutality as well. And so they took the heavy beats and kind of got rid of those lyrics and added their more sort of humorous, lighthearted lyrics. That doesn't mean this is a lighthearted album. This is a banger of an album, and it would go on to influence so many rap artists, and it brought a lot of spotlight to other great East Coast artists like Biggie Smalls, Nas, Mobb Deep, like great rappers. So, I mean, you can't beat Wu-Tang, so... Next up, I actually just recently got this last weekend. I've spun it like 4 times because I've been looking for this album for such a long time, and this craft recording just sounds so amazing. Number 1 record by Big Star. I mean, just such an essential album to have if you are into rock, power pop. This originally came out in 1972. You have Alex Chilton and Chris Bell, who are such a great songwriting duo. They saw the Beatles when they came to Memphis, Tennessee, and were so influenced by them that they decided they kind of wanted to be their own, like John Lennon and Paul McCartney sort of writing duo. And it just works so well. Their harmonies, their mix of sort of pop and rock, it's just a perfect album. And one of the best. I mean, it's so ballsy to name your debut album number 1 record, and if it wasn't a great album, it would have just gotten trashed and forgotten. But this is such an important record, an amazing sounding record, so definitely get it. And this craft recording sounds amazing. I mean, I don't have an original to compare it to, but this is a very cheap record, and you're definitely getting a really great value and sound off of this, so... And next up, this is definitely a top 5 all-time record for me. This is Queens of the Stone Age self-titled debut that originally came out in 1998. I mean, you had Josh Homme and former members of Kyuss. Kyuss broke up in 1995, and Josh Homme was kind of touring around with Screaming Trees as a guitar player, but then he ended up coming back to Joshua Tree in Southern California, and doing some like session stuff. The first desert sessions actually with former members of Kyuss, and then they decided to just form their own band. They were originally called Gamma Ray, but then there's a German like prog rock band that was called Gamma Ray, so they sued them, so they changed their name to Queens of the Stone Age, and they put out this album. And even though I am a big fan of all of the albums that came after this one from them, this one's just will always be my favorite. You can hear sort of the looseness and how they were kind of trying to influence, or use the influence of like the sludge stoner metal from Kyuss, but also kind of have more of a hard rock, even almost pop rock. There's some songs on here, like If Only to Me sounds like a pop rock song. I mean, there's no other band like Queens of the Stone Age, and this album really shows that. They even kind of have some proggy sounding stuff on here. This is just such a great album. I know these are really hard to find. I think the original that has a different cover goes for like thousands of dollars, and this reissue remaster they did in the early 2010s goes for like 150, 200. But I mean, it's so worth it. It's such a great album. This remaster sounds amazing, and this one features a couple of extra tracks that weren't on the original. But yeah, love this record. Definitely a top 5 album for me. And last but not least, the record that I think is one of the greatest debut albums ever, Are You Experienced by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Man, this originally came out in 1967. This completely changed the game in rock music. hard rock music, psych rock music. Not only just, Jimi Hendrix, amazing guitar sound, but like the backing, you have Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding just being such great drums and bass for Jimmy. They just all flow so well together. And I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine how big of an influence this album was back then, because so many great guitarists decided to pick up guitar for the first time from listening to this album. And I cannot imagine being 14 or 15 in 1967, seeing this in a record store, not listening to it before, putting it on your turntable and hearing the opening riff of Purple Haze, and just having your mind explode. We kind of take that for granted now because there's so many great guitar players that are kind of like Jimi Hendrix, and he's just such an innovator and just amazing songwriter. I mean, you got Purple Haze on here, Manic Depression, Hey Joe, Foxy Lady, Fire, The Wind Cries Mary. I mean, just such an innovator and game changer in rock music in general. And I cannot imagine how many people decided to pick up a guitar because of Jimi Hendrix and this album. So, thank you, Jimmy. But yeah, that was it for my 10 favorite debut records that I have in my collection. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.